Welcome back. Anxiety, grief, fear. These have become common emotions as we live through the COVID-19 pandemic. The past year has taken a toll even on those normally seen as emotionally strong. While there is some progress in the fight against the pandemic, the emotional scars continue to linger. Well, as we mark World Mental Health Day, I'm joined by Thabile from the SA Federation for Mental Health, Cassey Chambers from the SA Depression and Anxiety Group, and Thabile, who is a founder of Mental Wealth ZA. A very good morning to the three of you, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. So, Leon, I'm going to start with you. COVID-19, it's 18 months in. How are South Africans dealing with it, according to you?
Well, what we've seen is there's certainly been an increase in people reporting mental health problems. And I think what the pandemic has showed us is that, COVID-19 has impacted on the mental health of those who, as you said in your introduction, who were, people that were previously not really affected by mental health problems. And it's also exacerbated problems for those who had pre-existing mental health conditions. So I think research is also showing that as the actual viral pandemic is being treated, and as perhaps we are becoming more proficient at managing the virus through things like vaccinations and those things, the mental health problems related to COVID-19 are due to escalate even beyond the point where the viral pandemic has become more under control. So I think we are going to see the impact on mental health for a long time to come still, and we are going to be dealing with the mental health fallout beyond the actual viral pandemic.
Cassey, I think when I had a conversation with you at the beginning of the pandemic, if my recollection serves me well, you mentioned that the lines were off the hook, that people were calling in and were speaking about how difficult it is for them to deal with their mental health in a time when they're supposed to be trying to survive, the pandemic itself. Have things gotten better over time, or are people still really suffering?
I think for a lot of people, especially after 18 months, the impact has been huge. We're still seeing an increase in the number of calls every single day to our helplines. We're encouraged that more people are reaching out, but if we're looking at just before the pandemic, we were getting 600 calls per day. Straight after the pandemic in our first lockdown in March 2020, we were getting 1,200 calls per day. We're now averaging over 2,200 calls per day, and that excludes the number of people reaching out online and emails and SMSs. So the demand for our services are definitely increasing. And what we're also noticing after every wave is we're getting more and more people calling us, reaching out for help, needing some assistance and support. So I think that the need is definitely growing and increasing. And as Leon mentioned, we're going to be dealing with this for years to come, as they term the mental health impact of COVID as the second pandemic.
Thabile, how difficult is it to deal with your mental health when you're supposed to be trying to survive, when you're supposed to, make sure that you don't catch COVID and then end up in the ICU and then, potentially lose your life? How difficult is it to have to weigh what it is that's more important?
It is near impossible. When I have to think about my mental health in isolation, it's difficult enough. But when I have to think about my mental health in the context of a global pandemic, it is extremely difficult. You now have to think about the fact that you can't leave your house without a mask. You have to think about the fact that you are, even if it's on a slightly subconscious level, suspicious of everyone around you. I mean, we can't touch, we can't be close to one another, we're not supposed to be close to one another. And that in itself affects your mental health. So, as most people know, I have a pre-existing condition. But when you add on to the conditions that we now live in under the pandemic, they're making things so much worse. You constantly live in fear. You constantly live in a state of anxiety on top of whatever it was you were experiencing before. It's extremely difficult, and I feel like we need to have these kind of conversations. We need to have little open forums where what it that we are doing, in our little respective lives to combat the mental health impact of COVID-19. I haven't seen it as yet as much like you, but, I'm hoping that, platforms like this will start the conversation.
Leon, is enough being done to deal with mental health? I mean, we're putting it on air on the 10th of October 2021. We'll put it again on air on the 10th of October 2022. We put it on air on the 10th of October last year. But mental health is something that, people deal with every single day, every hour of every single day. So is enough being done to put awareness on mental health?
Certainly not. I think, what we need to be seeing is mental health on the radio, on the TV, in the newspapers, on everybody's lips every single day, not just on the 10th of October every year. And I think that's one of the problems. And as you correctly said, mental health, it affects everybody. It's not something like Thabile. It's not something that lives in a bubble. Mental health is absolutely integral to your overall health and well-being. And you can't be a healthy person holistically if your mental health is not being looked after. So I think, there's definitely not enough being done about mental health awareness. As Thabile said, these kinds of conversations are really important. And I think especially in the time of COVID-19, I think the message that needs to go out is that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay for people to feel stressed. It's okay for people to feel fearful. And it's okay to talk about it. It's about breaking the silence and saying, let's talk about mental health. Let's admit that we are all struggling and let's reach out for help. And I think if anything good has come from COVID-19, it's perhaps that it's been a bit of a leveler, and that we are, people are more comfortable talking about their mental health because it is so widespread and everybody is being affected.
Cassey, when someone that is dealing with mental health calls in to SADC and perhaps speaks to a Cassey Chambers, they're expecting Cassey Chambers to be in the kind of position where she can help. But there is no consideration for the fact that Cassey Chambers herself could be dealing with a number of problems of her own. People from SADC, people that are supposed to be the ones helping people with mental health, how are they dealing?
This is really important, caring for the caregiver. And this extends to our healthcare workers around the country who are doing an amazing job every single day. It's so important that we look after our own mental health in order to look after other people's mental health. And we really have to make sure that even with our counselors, that we provide them with support, debriefing. They're also navigating through this pandemic themselves and dealing with their own issues at home and having to worry and stress about family and children and parents. And so we're having to be very careful to offer them support. And we're incredibly grateful. These are all our volunteer counselors who give up their time every week to help other people. So their mental health is incredibly important. And I think it's about role modeling, practicing what we preach. If we look after our mental health, we can help other people look after their mental health. And that's why even starting conversations like this one, but even encouraging our healthcare workers, our vulnerable groups, other NPOs to talk about mental health, normalize these conversations, have them more often. We can actually talk about ways to cope, supporting each other, and making it less taboo to talk about this issue. The more we break down these barriers, encouraging people to share what works for them, what doesn't, if they're having a bad day or not, the stronger we can become. We've heard the saying, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And we're really having to make sure that we can build that resilience, build that support system and information to get us through the months where we're still not sure what's going to happen. Everything is still uncertain. But what we can do is be intentional with looking after our mental health every single day.
Thabile, there is a stigma that comes with mental health. We grow up in the kinds of environments as black people, and I will say as black people because I'm a black person, so I can only but relate to people who are like me, where how well mama, and mama's like, oh, you're suffering from anxiety, whatever that is. There seems to be a misunderstanding. There seems to be a lack of empathy, a lack of sympathy even, for people who are struggling with mental health, because our elders perhaps don't understand what it is that we're dealing with, and they feel like maybe we're just being, ratefa in a way. Just talk to me about the stigma that people with mental health deal with.
The stigma is not only prevalent, as you said, it is extremely dangerous for people like us. But I love that Leon said that the pandemic is a bit of a leveler, because we are all in this pandemic together. Before the pandemic, I was in my bipolar mood disorder by myself. But now we are all experiencing the anxiety and the fear and the grief that comes with the pandemic together. So, it's not a nice outcome, but it is a positive outcome that this could be a stepping stone towards other people understanding mental illness better, now that they are getting a bit of a taste, so to say, of it. Like we said, we keep going back to the conversations. That was very difficult conversations with our, I think about, what would happen if you sat down and you said, Coco, how do you feel, things going on? How do you feel about the fact that you can't go to church anymore, for example? You can't do your side meetings anymore because of the pandemic. Speak to them in a language that they understand. Anxiety, they do not understand that. But if you speak to them about an experience that they can directly relate to, start to bridge those gaps between us and them, when it comes to understanding mental illness, when it comes to understanding why we need to address mental illness. So I think if we could start in small ways, that it would make a remarkable difference. It would make a difference, because, can you imagine Coco now having a conversation with you about depression, about anxiety? She might not think that she's talking about it that way, but she is. Language is extremely important in this field. So I think if we were to approach one another in ways that we can directly relate to, then we could break down the stigma that we're experiencing. But like I said, we're all in this together now. And because we're all in this together, we have no choice but to break down the stigma further than what we've been trying to do, even before this. Like you said, we've had this conversation last year, the year before that, we're going to have it next year. But now it's urgent. Now it is extremely urgent that we break down the stigma, because we are all in this together. And if we do not, the mental health impact of COVID is going to be seen possibly for decades after we deal with the viral infection itself.
Guys, time is unfortunately against us, so I want to leave the final word with all three of you. And this is the question that I want to pose to you: is, as somebody who is not dealing with mental health issues, or at least has not been shown, had their mental health issues put forward to them, how then do I deal, or rather, how then do I accommodate somebody who is dealing with mental health issues? Leon, I'm going to start with you.
I think the important thing is just to support people to reach out for help. There are wonderful organizations out there like SADAG doing amazing work with their helplines. Our organization also has a helpline. And I think it's just about encouraging people to feel safe and secure, that it is okay to reach out for help. It's just about that first step. If somebody has been the victim of stigma and discrimination, and they are fearful to disclose a mental health condition, it really is just about supporting that very, very first step to say, it's okay, and I can do this with you. If you're supporting a family member or a friend, it's just say, let's reach out, I'll help you along the line. Let's find an appropriate helpline, or let's go see a counselor or a psychologist, but just support, reach out. And I think at the end of the day, it's about being kind to each other and being supportive during these really difficult times, and recognizing that, it affects all of us really, whether you have a diagnosed condition or not. And it's just about being kind and supportive to one another.
Cassey?
Often we feel like we're all alone in how we're feeling and navigating all the stuff that's happening around us, and we don't always know how to start that conversation. So my message will be to the loved ones, friends, colleagues around someone who might be struggling is to do a check-in. Ask your friend, ask your family member, ask your children, how are you really doing? How are you really coping right now? Even if it's just for today. So I'd really encourage you to start that conversation, start it around the dinner table, on the way to school, at your next board meeting or team meeting. The more we can actually start that conversation for that person who does feel overwhelmed or not sure how to reach out for help and doesn't know what to say, if you create those safe spaces, the next time they might actually reach out and say, actually, I'm not doing well. And then, as Leon said, link to resources, go online, go have a look at what is available. The most important thing is that you're not alone and that there is help and that there is support and that it's okay to get help. And especially today, being World Mental Health Day, every day should be World Mental Health Day. Thank you.
Thabile, I leave the last word with you. You've already mentioned language. What else can I do to make sure that I accommodate someone like yourself who's dealing with mental health issues?
You could open yourself up as a safe space to that person. You know, we're not all medical professionals. I'm not, and I do not portray myself to be. But on my platform, we openly and honestly have these conversations, and people take comfort in the fact that, as Cassey said, you're not alone. So if you can present yourself as a safe space where the person will not feel judged, most importantly, the person will not feel judged. The person will not feel as though they're putting themselves in a position to be belittled by making themselves vulnerable to you, with leaps and bounds in this fight that we're fighting against mental illness and mental health issues within the context of the pandemic.
Thabile, thank you very much. Leon, thank you as well. And Cassey, thank you for your guys' time here on Newslink on ENCA. That is Leon Thabile, of course, is from the South African Federation for Mental Health. And then it's also Cassey Chambers from the South African SADC, of course. And then Thabile Mbe, who is the founder of Mental Wealth ZA. That is where, of course, we're going to be leaving the discussion for mental health. But it is Mental Health Awareness Month. It's not even just for the day that is the 10th of October, but it's also not even just something that is to be dealt with only in October. Mental health is something that people struggle with throughout the year, 365, sometimes 366 days of their lives. So be kind and remember, it's okay to not be okay.